for obvious reasons. We had control of 10 nuclear missiles. These were the Minuteman I at the time, flying very fast, stopping in midair, reversing course, making 90-degree turns, no engine noise, and they could not explain the performance of these lights. He said they were not aircraft. You mean like UFOs? Because in fact we had reports of UFOs. He calls back, and this time he's extremely frightened. You can tell by his voice that a glowing red-orange light hovering just above the facility, just above the front gate, actually. So I said, do whatever it takes to secure the facility. And we both knew what that meant. I mean, it meant something was wrong with the missiles. I mean, they were disabled during UFO sightings. That we would never speak of this ever to anyone. We're going to be presented with the proposition at some point of speaking to sentient life forms from elsewhere in the universe and accounting for ourselves. I know that the Vatican is interested in the possibility of life elsewhere. Briefly, and I don't want to get into too many details here, but a few years ago I was asked to write a letter to His Holiness the Pope and talk about my incident and how it might influence how we go forward as a civilization.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Welcome, one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment.
This is Reverend Stu from Melbourne, Australia.
And my name is Mike, an active UAP field investigator in Southern California. Won't you join us for today's conversation? Stuart, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks, Mike. Great to see you.
You too. So we have a very interesting guest today. And his name is Mr. Robert Salas, former Captain, U.S. Air Force. He's most well known for the incidents that happened in the 1967, actually, at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where UFOs came over the base and shut down 10 independently wired thermonuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Whoa, okay. I'm going to be very interested to hear what he's got to say. And what an amazing man, holding such an important, integral role there during that time. I'm definitely interested to hear what he's got to say.
Absolutely. He has been speaking publicly for decades about this, and it is truly our honor and privilege to bring him into our show here and have this conversation. And we're also going to be talking about some other things aside from the actual incident. So let's just get right down to it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege and honor to introduce to you on Universal Disclosure, Mr. Robert Salas. Robert, thank you so much for being here with us today. It is truly our privilege and honor.
Mike, it's great to be with you. I'm very interested in seeing where this conversation goes this morning.
Yes, I am as well. I mean, I got to say, you are, I think, in my opinion, a pillar of this topic. You've been talking internationally for a very long time. You've written many books about it as well, and you were part of one of the most significant UFO events in our history. And with that said, though, when you and I were talking on the phone, about what we're going to do here, you had mentioned some things. I don't want to talk about it yet, but some new things, essentially, and some new ideas that I think is going to be wonderful to talk about with everybody.
Yeah, actually, I've been thinking about this subject since I read a little quote by Carl Sagan. I don't know if you guys have read his book Cosmos or seen the series, but in there he states, and I can't quote it exactly, but I'll try my best to paraphrase it. He says, if we were to meet an extraterrestrial presence, who would speak for Earth? And so that got me thinking about, yeah, exactly. Which one of us would be the most, not privileged, but proper ones to speak for humanity, basically?
That's a great question. I certainly don't know the answer to that. And this is a global issue. It's not just America, right? These things happen all over the world on a regular basis.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But you and I actually, I met you, Robert, a couple times with in-person meetings with the local MUFON group that I work with. But this is an independent production of that. But nonetheless, that's how we sort of know each other. And Stuart and I don't know if you know, but we met over a decade ago on a music forum. So we're wanting to break the ice with you with a musical question. And I think Stuart doesn't even know this yet. It's going to be interesting to see his reaction. So you like all kinds of music, which I can appreciate, and I do myself. But there's a late artist from Australia named Tony O'Connor that you enjoy.
Have you ever heard of Tony, Stuart?
I believe I have. Yeah, I have heard of Tony.
I thought that was pretty interesting. That when you were talking about the various people you like, and it's like, I wonder if Stuart has heard of this artist.
I love that.
But nonetheless, Robert, you've been speaking, for a very, very long time, and I do apologize to ask you this, but if you can go over just sort of briefly your background and history, what made you decide to go into the Air Force originally, and who is, for anyone who might not know, who is Robert Salas?
Well, thanks for asking. I asked myself that same question many times. But I decided to go in the Air Force because I had a couple of uncles who had served in World War II, and then I got interested in the military aspect of things and read a few books. One I remember was "God is My Co-Pilot." I forget the author,
Wow.
but and then we did not have a lot of money in our family to send the kids to college. So when the opportunity came up to apply for the Air Force Academy, which would require my being in the Air Force and spending a certain amount of time in the Air Force after graduation, I decided to try that route, and I succeeded in getting an appointment after going through a couple of intervals of testing, and that's how I got to the Air Force Academy. And from there on, I spent 4 years, graduated in 1964, and spent the next 7 or so years on active duty. I was weapons controller. I was a drone controller. I flew drones. The initial aspect of drones was they were used for targeting, flying targeting vehicles during a training for intercepts. So these would be practice for intercepting incoming foreign aircraft or enemy aircraft. So I did that for a while, and then found myself going through missile training and going on missile duty. After that, I finished my master's degree in engineering and at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, as a matter of fact, and then went to work in Los Angeles Air Force Station on the Titan III program as a propulsion engineer. And after that, I resigned from the Air Force in 1971, went to work for Martin Marietta, who was trying to get contracts on the upcoming space shuttle program. And so I worked on the manipulator arm for a while. That's that big arm that comes out of the bay of the shuttle.
Wow.
And then I went to work for Rockwell International on the same project proposals. And then I worked for Federal Aviation Administration for about 21 years. And that's how I got down to Indonesia. I was asked to support the Indonesian government in certifying a commuter aircraft. Let's see, so in 1994, still working for FAA, I decided to resign from government service and become a teacher. And I was a mathematics teacher at the high school level for about 17 years. So, and then I retired from that and decided I wanted to be a writer, and and that's what I've been doing since.
Wow, that's quite a diverse range of employments that you've been in there. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. Just an ordinary life, I guess.
I think far from it. So, Robert, you were part of what I would call one of the most significant UFO events involving the United States military during the Cold War. Can you tell us what happened in March of 1967 at the Malmstrom Air Force Base?
Sure, I'll go over fairly quickly.
Yeah, sorry.
So in March of '67, I was on missile duty on a crew, a two-man crew that went out to a place called Oscar Flight. This was near Lewistown. Actually, it's more near Roy, Montana, which is about the center part of the state of Montana. Assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is in Great Falls, Montana. At any rate, we were out there. I was in command of the facility. The facility involved an underground capsule, 60 feet underground, and security guards upstairs. I had about 6 security guards, and it was a well-secure area, fenced in, barbed wire, the whole works. And of course, we had very strict procedures about how to access the facility, etc. We were obliged to stay underground in this hardened capsule. Hardened meaning should be able to withstand a nuclear blast above us. That was the theory anyway. And we could not leave our position, our location, for obvious reasons. We had control of 10 nuclear missiles. These were the Minuteman I at the time. Right now we've got Minuteman III. At any rate, at some point in the evening, I got a call from the upstairs guard, the main guard, saying they'd been seeing strange lights in the sky, flying very fast, stopping in midair, reversing course, making 90-degree turns. This may sound familiar to some of you. No engine noise, and they could not explain the performance of these lights. He said they were not aircraft. No aircraft that he knew of could do things like that. So, I said, you mean like UFOs? Because in fact, we had reports of UFOs in the Great Falls area. There were newspaper reports of people reporting strange lights in the sky at night. And I was just joking, and he said, well, sir, they're not aircraft. So I said, I thanked him, and basically not much more to talk about. And so I hung up, and then 5 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he's extremely frightened. You can tell by his voice that he was very frightened, disoriented. He's shouting into the phone, screaming actually, and I couldn't make much sense of him until I calmed him down. Finally, he said there's a glowing red-orange light hovering just above the facility, just above the front gate, actually. The gate was about 12 feet high, so we can use our imagination how high this thing was. But he said it was very large from his perspective. It was at least 50 feet long, but it was a bright, pulsating light. I asked him if he could see any object inside the light, and he said, well, possibly a disc-shaped or oval-shaped object inside the light, but it was very bright, and it was hard for him to see anything in there. He had all the guards out with their weapons drawn and wanted me to give him instructions on what to do next. And of course, it was really his responsibility to secure the facility. So I said, do whatever it takes to secure the facility. And then he hung up, said one of his guards was injured. And so at that point, I went to wake my commander, who was taking a rest break. We had a little cot down there where we took little naps now and then. And just as I was about to tell him about the phone calls, we get a lot of horns, bells going off, and we both knew what that meant. It meant something was wrong with the missiles. So we looked over at the board, the status board, and sure enough, the missiles were going from green to red, meaning they were becoming inoperable or disabled, could not be launched. Green means they were launchable, ready to go, and red couldn't be launched. So we went through our procedures, and checked. We had a way of querying the system, and we were getting the same message on each missile: guidance and control system failure. Next thing we did was we also had indicator lights at two of the facilities, intrusion lights, meaning there may have been some sort of entry or intrusion at the launch facilities where the missiles are actually located. They were located about a mile or two from our location in a kind of a ring around our central point. So I had to call and send guards out there. Guards did go out there, radioed back that they were seeing the same lights above our missiles at two of those facilities. My commander reported to command post at Great Falls at the main base, and they told him the same thing happened at another facility. Now, when my commander turned to me and said, and told me that, I thought he meant that evening, but it wasn't until much later I realized it was a week earlier, and that would have been the Echo flight shutdown. We were at Oscar flight. So that was a different location. That occurred on March 16th, 1967. So within the span of about a week, ours occurred on March 24th. We lost 20 missiles, or by loss, I mean they were disabled during UFO sightings. I want to emphasize that the missiles themselves were not damaged, or there was no destruction at all from these incidents. It was simply a matter of upsetting a particular piece of hardware that controlled the guidance system of the missiles. So without a good guidance system, the missiles would not have nowhere to go, so they shut down. They were brought back up on alert status within about a day. but we did have to send crews out there to each of the sites to go through a process of calibrating, reorienting the guidance system, etc., which took time. So I'd say, I'd estimate, because I wasn't back up on alert. We were relieved the next morning, and we were ordered to return to the base. Actually, they sent a helicopter out for us, and specifically to get us back to the base immediately, because, basically they wanted to shut us up, and they accomplished that through a non-disclosure agreement, which they made us sign, that we would never speak of this ever to anyone. And it's another story that we can talk about that if you want, about how I was able to finally come forward and speak about this publicly.
Yes, please. That would be really interesting.
Okay, well, this was 1967. Some 27 years later, 1994, I was in Seattle, Washington, and of course I hadn't spoken about this to anyone, not even my wife. 1994, I was, like I said, wanted to become a teacher, and so I signed up at the University of Washington for a Master's in Education program, which included a teaching certificate. And I went through the bookstore there. Happened to pass an area where I saw this book titled Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. So I picked the book up, interesting title, and just opened it to one page. I know this sounds a little out there, but this is the way it happened. I opened it up to page 301 in this book, which was about a 500-page book. And there I read a short paragraph stating that UFOs had gone and shut down missiles assigned to Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana in 1966 and 67. And when I read that, I thought, my God, I thought this was classified. And it sounded a lot like what I had experienced. So I was pretty excited because I thought, how did it get in this book? And without it being declassified. And so I decided to, first I went home and told my wife about it. And she supported me in going to see the Mutual UFO Network had investigators, obviously, that would help witnesses. And so I talked to the local MUFON representative, and she advised me to contact James Klotz, who was an investigator for MUFON. And I asked James to submit FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to the Air Force about this particular incident, but don't say anything about UFOs, just ask about these missiles being shut down for strange reasons. And so we did, and the Air Force wrote back and said, this is classified, but since it's been so long, we're going to declassify this incident and send you documents. So that's what they did. And they started sending me documents. They declassified the Echo flight incident, which was the one that happened a week earlier from mine. And I decided to make, it sounded like it was my incident. I had forgotten exactly where I was, which flight, because all the launch control centers looked the same. And I had forgotten I was not at Echo, I was at Oscar. 27 years had gone by, a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of history, a lot of things happened in that time. And so, but I thought it was my incident. So I decided to come forward and speak about it publicly as a UFO incident. And I've been doing it for 30 years now, over 30 years.
That's incredible. So I actually just learned a little piece of information right now. It was you who was the catalyst, essentially, for this event becoming declassified. Is that fair to say?
I started the ball rolling for sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. However, I must say, Robert Jameson, who was one of the key witnesses, because he was able to validate that all of Oscar flight was deactivated, and it was a UFO incident. He came forward to Robert Hastings, who wrote the book UFOs and Nukes. Earlier, at an earlier time period, so let's say 1993 possibly, he came forward and spoke with Hastings about it. Hastings didn't put my incident in his UFOs and Nukes. Well, he did eventually, but not at that point. He hadn't known about the Malmstrom incidents. But as far as going public with this as a primary witness, yes, I guess I could say I started the ball rolling on that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to say thank you for that. I mean, that's I don't even know what, that's amazing. When you said that the UFOs effectively turned off the guidance system of the missiles, that's very interesting too. Do you think that there was a message in there in some way, perhaps?
Well, the overall message, I didn't come to this conclusion about the overall message until I started doing more research, and that started in '94 about similar incidents, because as I started contacting individuals that might have witnessed or been witness to these events, the Echo and Oscar incidents, I started hearing, pardon me, other stories of other incidents where UFOs would come over and simply shine a beam of light over nuclear weapons storage facilities and then fly off. And also other incidents where they interfered with our weapons in some way. So I started realizing that our two incidents was not unique so much that they didn't happen before and after, and they're still happening fairly recently.
Could I ask you, did these events happen at a similar time in the day or night? Is there any correlation on that level?
I can't say that. I know of incidents that have happened both day and night, so I don't know that you can correlate that. Of course, it's more frightening at night for the people that security guards, airmen that see these things in the evening. But like I say, there have been multiple incidents in both daytime and evening.
Thank you. You mentioned that one of the guards had mentioned that another guard had been injured. Now, I'm curious to know how that guard got injured and what were the injuries.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I didn't mean to leave you hanging out there with that. It had nothing to do specifically with the UFO. It had to do with the guard and his weapon. He injured his hand, actually cut his hand, but we're not sure if it had to do with something to do with his weapon or him trying to climb the fence area, which we had. We had barbed wire, and he may have cut his hand on the barbed wire. I never got a clear explanation of that. The way things happened, The guards upstairs were contacted by their superiors not to speak to anyone about this. Almost immediately after they reported it to their superiors. And then, of course, we were flown back to the base immediately to sign this non-disclosure statement, and we were not able to speak with them. In fact, they did call my home the next day, the next morning. I was called at home by one of the guards who wanted to have a meeting with all of us and speak about this, just to exchange information. And I had to turn him down, which really killed me to have to do that. But I was under written orders never to speak of this on pain of spending many years in prison. So,
wow.
And I didn't know if I was being monitored on my home phone or not, so I had to turn him down.
Understandable. Is there any broader context here? Now, was something happening politically with another country? Was there a heightened threat at this time which led to these beings or entities involving themselves?
Well, I can tell you that, pardon me, we were involved obviously in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the communist countries, and then we were fighting in Vietnam, of course. But I later in my research saw a diagram that showed we had some 60 to 70,000 nuclear weapons. Not just the U.S. This was the aggregate number worldwide, and it was the highest number ever we've had available for use. So it could be that these non-human entities, extraterrestrial beings, and I'm convinced that that's what they are, knew that. In fact, they've shown a couple of times that they are well aware of what technology we had as far as war-making abilities, so they were probably well aware that this was a very high number of nuclear weapons, and we were on the brink of annihilating ourselves.
Wow.
That's the best I can do with that question.
Robert, I remember when I was listening to you speak in person, I wanted to ask a question. I don't think I was, for whatever reason, able to. I remember you saying that there was a UFO officer assigned to the base, and I was just curious, was that an official military title of UFO officer, or is that just like scuttlebutt, kind of talk at the water cooler amongst the crew there?
What happened was in 1966, the Air Force issued a contract to the University of Colorado, and Edward Condon was assigned to run that program, but the purpose was to try to determine the impact of these UFO objects over military, especially Air Force bases. And so the Air Force agreed to have an officer assigned specifically to help them with their study. This was the so-called Condon investigation. And so they assigned particular officers at military bases as UFO officers. This was not a regular title you would normally have at a military base, but for this particular purpose, we did have a UFO officer, a man by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chase, who was assigned to help the Condon investigations, and did a pretty good job of cover-up instead of disclosing the truth. I've gone into great detail on this in my latest book and previous books. We can talk about this, but
Yeah, in
might
fact,
take a while.
you have several books out, of one of which I have an autographed copy of Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, and you, in addition to that, I believe you're talking about UAPs and the nuclear puzzle, visitations, national security, and the need for transparency. There's also Inside the UFO Archives and Faded Giant. Did I miss any of them?
Just three, really. The Faded Giant, and then the other two that you mentioned. I did give a complete presentation to the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or ARROW. That's the U.S. government office that's primarily supposed to be involved in getting to the bottom of the questions involving these objects within U.S. government, although they're doing a pretty poor job of it. And that took about 2 hours. I gave them all the supporting documents that I have retrieved, about 22 separate items, and the testimonies of my commander on audio tape, and like I said, Robert Jameson, who was the man that brought the Oscar flight back up on alert with his maintenance crew, and Walter Fiegel, who was commander at the Echo flight during the incident there. I've got all those people on audio tape or videotape supporting the basic facts of these incidents.
That's incredible. And by the way, I'm going to be putting links to the books that you've written on our website, universaldisclosurepodcast.com. And if anyone wants to go there to search out this episode,
I might mention my own website, spiralgalaxy.org. Spiralgalaxy, all one word, .org. And on there, if you go to Malmstrom incidents, I've got some of the evidence. I just mentioned some of the audio tapes and documents on that website also.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, as going through all this and writing all these books and such, how has your opinion or view of this phenomenon of UFOs, has it changed at all over time, and if so, how?
Well, I think every day I firm up my conviction that these objects are controlled or flown by extraterrestrial beings, and they are here for a specific reason, and that has to do with humanity. I think they're here to help us evolve somewhat, to recognize the folly of our ways, specifically as it applies to warfare and the capability to use nuclear weapons to destroy the planet. So it has changed me in that regard. I'm every day I become more and more fully committed to tell the public what I know, and also warn of the possibilities of our complete destruction by the use of nuclear weapons. So I guess you could say I've been changed, yeah.
Did you start to feel that shift immediately after the incident, or only later when you revisited the incident?
That's a good question. I think I started to change almost immediately. Of course, I couldn't speak of this, which was very frustrating. And that's part of the reason I started to forget small details, like the name of the guy that was down there in the capsule with me. It took a couple of years to locate him because I couldn't remember his name. But personally, on a personal level, I don't think I mentioned that after that second call from the guard upstairs telling me or screaming into the phone about this object above us, I looked over at our status board at our missiles because I either got a message from who knows where, or a strong feeling that something was going to happen to those missiles. And of course, underlying thinking as a duty officer working with these massively destructive weapons, if we did ever have to use them, of course, we were aware of what would happen, and with an all-out nuclear war, and so those kinds of thoughts came back to me often, even before and after the incident.
I find that very interesting. So that means you're already pondering existential questions.
Sure. After the incident occurred, I couldn't stop thinking about it, of course, in the short term, and what it meant, what the implications were. And of course, I came to the conclusion fairly quickly that these were not craft that were constructed or built on this planet. In fact, that was one of the first questions I asked my commander as I walked into his office, the squadron commander. I said, was this some sort of an Air Force exercise that happened to us? And he looked at me and said, absolutely not. So at that point, I realized this was something else, something very strange. And like I said, that gnawed at the back of my mind for some 27 years. So I was eager to go public when we got what I thought was the go-ahead from the Air Force to. I don't think they realized, at least the people that handled our FOIA request realized how frequent this was happening. And I later got confirmation of that from another man, Air Force personnel, that this was happening fairly frequently, even at Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Did you feel some trepidation when you were finally able to speak about this, like telling your wife something you'd held on to for so long?
Did I feel trepidation?
Yeah, it would have been, because holding it inside out of necessity, because you'd been threatened to not talk about it. Then when you were finally able to speak about it, was there a sense of relief, or did you still feel some trepidation?
I'd say it was absolute relief. Absolutely. I had no qualms about talking about it, given the circumstances that they had declassified the incident that I thought I was involved in. It turns out 2 years later, I realized that it was not my incident. And I was dumbfounded to realize that there had been 2 such incidents within the span of about a week.
I find that fascinating. Now, the 24th of March, 1967 was a full moon day or night, and that's why I was asking you earlier about what time it occurred. And throughout history and different cultures, strange phenomena do occur on or around the full moon. Is there a chance that there's some correlation there?
I have no idea. I think we're in a different area there. That's astrological belief, I think. But I have no way of correlating it with the full moon.
Well, strange phenomena apparently occur on a full moon, so I was wondering if there's a potential correlation there. But you did mention there were similar incidents occurred. Was it approximately 10 days prior to that date?
Well, I will say that I got a report from an individual who was on duty. Again, this was early, I think it was February of that year, who said his guard had reported seeing a strange light hovering over one of the missile sites. And then, of course, the March 16th, 8 days before ours, there was the Echo flight incident. Now, but in another correspondence with an airman whose sole job was really to maintain the history of the wing history of the Air Force unit there at Malmstrom Air Force Base, stated that there were multiple incidents of UFO sightings at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So that probably goes back years.
I wonder why there's a particular interest from these beings for that particular location, in light of the fact that you told me there was such a proliferation of these weapons throughout the country.
Well, the incidents have happened at a lot of the nuclear bases. Minot Air Force Base had a particular incident in 1966, September of 66, about 6 months before ours. Same thing happened. UFO comes over, shuts down all 10 missiles. And this is documented by Dave Schindel. He's even written a book called It Never Happened by Schindel. And he is also given testimony to the Aero group that I just mentioned. And I've got 13 others, or 13 total incidents in my book that you have, Mike. There's a chart there that shows other 13 incidents of these types of sightings over nuclear facilities.
Wow, I didn't realize there'd been so many. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, and if I'm going into an area you're not comfortable with, please let me know. But like on a scale of 1 to 10, with 5 not being an option, and I'm not asking about religion specifically, but in terms of spirituality, would you consider would you sort of rate yourself as a spiritual person, or?
Well, yeah, I don't think any of us can avoid it. We've got so many existential questions about what does this all mean? Who made the universe, and for what purpose, and why are we here, etc. So I think all of us somehow have some spiritual questions, at least. And so, but I'm thinking about things like how do we stop fighting world wars? How do we stop fighting amongst each other in warfare? How can we behave better as humans? Like I told you before we went on air, I think we're going to be presented with the proposition at some point of speaking to sentient life forms from elsewhere in the universe and accounting for ourselves, accounting for who we are. By we, I mean humans, humanity, and how we behave, because they're going to want to know, what are your values, and why do you behave the way you do? Why do you have these nuclear weapons which are capable of destroying all life on this planet? And so, in thinking about that, if you don't mind, I'll just ramble on for a little bit.
No, please. It was fascinating when we were talking on the phone. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah. if these beings are so advanced technologically as we think they are, by the performance of these craft that they're bringing, they have a history. They have also a history, and they probably have gone through some of the things that we humans have gone through in our history, including warfare and including behavioral questions about how properly to behave, I guess, is one way to put it, or their ethical value systems, their moral value systems, and their spiritual concepts. So they have been through a process, and what I think we should do is study what kind of process we've been through. For example, I was looking at we were able to visit Italy in 2019 and go through some of the wonderful museums they have there. One of them I went through in Florence, I think it was the Palazzo Vecchio Museum in Florence, and they had statues and paintings of the seven sisters, and these represented the seven heavenly values, which was a concept brought forth by the Catholic Church: prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, faith, hope, charity. And so they actually had paintings of these women, and of course there's a correlation to the Pleiades, the
seven daughters.
What's that? Seven daughters of Atlas, right? Or
I think so. Yeah, I've definitely heard this motif before. You're right.
Yeah, and then of course there are the seven deadly sins too: pride, greed, envy, gluttony, lust, sloth, and wrath. And so the Catholic Church, used these concepts to develop these seven heavenly values, and sins that we ought to consider in our lives. And so we've got a constant process going on here of how humanity should be in order to live in peace, I guess. Live in peace. And so I'm thinking that the ETs, for lack of a better term, also have some sort of a universal value system. And they're judging us, possibly judging us against whatever value systems they've established. So I think this is a worthwhile conversation to have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's really why we're doing this and starting out with this new podcast, as it were. So I'd like to get your opinion, Robert, on something that I don't know if you're aware of or not, because it's sort of breaking news in a way. It just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe, and it's sort of vague, but I don't remember if it was Fox News or what major news station broke it, but the Vatican has announced that they will soon be, it's like an announcement of an announcement, they will soon be putting forward some sort of guidelines or statements about paranormal phenomenon, apparitions. They didn't say UFOs or UAPs, but I have a feeling that it's going to be in there or soon after. Do you have any sort of comments or thoughts about that?
Only that I can't go into any details here, but I know that the Vatican is interested in, again, having either some presentation, discussion, dialogue about the possibility of life elsewhere off Earth, and again, how to deal with that in a spiritual context. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I can just, I'll mention briefly, and I don't want to get into too many details here, but a few years ago, I was asked to write a letter to His Holiness the Pope and talk about my incident and how it might influence how we go forward as a civilization, etc. And so I did. But it turns out the secretary who had requested, one of the Pope's secretaries who had requested this, changed positions or was replaced, and I'm not sure the letter ever got to the Pope, but it was written, and I've recently been asked to write another one, so we'll see what happens there, but I think, again, one of the things that I would like to see is the abolishment of all nuclear weapons. I think that was one of the messages, the message actually, of these incidents over nuclear facilities. I think they're imploring us to rid ourselves of these weapons of massive destruction. I don't know if that helps, but I do think the Pope, the Papal See, is interested in this subject.
I wonder if Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka might be involved in that. She wrote a book called American Cosmic, and she has an association with the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think, I do appreciate those comments. It's definitely helpful. So, Robert, I want to ask you something else. You have been, again, talking and working towards disclosure of this phenomenon for decades. And I know that there's been times in the past where people got excited that there was going to be an official capital D disclosure event that didn't happen. And there's, amongst all the podcasters and things like that out there right now, there's similar talk of, this has happened before, it's not really going to happen with the big D disclosure. I myself am feeling that that's not necessarily a correct statement, because it seems to me that we've never had congressional hearings with legislation, essentially the UAP Disclosure Act being passed. And I do sort of feel like we are literally now starting a slow rollout of disclosure, perhaps by design, to reduce ontological shock for some folks. What do you think about that? Do you think that we are really finally getting to the point where it's going to be official?
Well, I agree with the fact that we are making progress. I've never seen, except for the last few years, any official, and by official I mean regulatory wording in, for example, the DoD National Defense Authorization Act for the last 3 or 4 years now has wording speaking to the question of unidentified flying objects or unidentified aerial phenomenon, as they phrase it now. So we have made progress in that sense. There are still congressmen and senators who are highly interested in learning more of what's being withheld from them. But I'll go back to what I've written in the book you have, Mike, and also the latest book where I write about an entrenched cabal. I'll use that word because it simply means a secret group doing secret things behind the scenes. And I think it's an international cabal. It's not just the U.S., but I think there are members of this cabal that are associated with various governments throughout the world that have been conspiring. I'll use that word too, conspiring to withhold information from the public. This happened early in, well, probably just after Roswell or even before that, where this organization had its origins, and it's proceeded to the present day to maintain secrecy. If you follow what's been happening in the U.S. Government with regard to these secrets, there's been very little progress in actually getting, for example, the U.S. Air Force to acknowledge, for example, my incident. And I even asked the Aero people when I gave them that testimony I mentioned, after 2 hours of testimony, and they complimented me on my research. They called me a patriot, blah, blah, blah. And then I asked them, well, are you going to validate or verify what I've told you with the Air Force? And they said, no, we've tried to validate certain facts before on this subject with very little success. So there is definitely a lot of pressure to keep these secrets, and they're using whatever means at their disposals to do that. So a complete disclosure, I think, is still out there, and it's going to take a lot of work to really break open some of these secrets. It's going to take some courage by whistleblowers from other witnesses to come forward. It's going to take some courage within the governmental apparatus, the Congress, the president, etc., to get some real progress in getting to the bottom of just what's been going on. How much do we know now? How much have we experimented with the recovered craft, with the recovered bodies, and that sort of thing?
Do you believe the secrecy is in place with these cabal groups because they know full well what the phenomena is, or because they don't know what the phenomena is?
I think probably both. One of the reasons I think they're keeping, I think I identified 2 or 3, but reasons being that they're keeping these secrets is it's very lucrative. So I think greed is involved here. Greed, one of the 7 deadly sins. And so there's money to be made from keeping these secrets. Is also, these secrets are very powerful. In other words, if you knew how to use, for example, our geomagnetic field of the planet to operate these craft, it's a pretty powerful secret, and how that operated. I think they have tried to back engineer craft. They have actually flown back engineered craft, and I think they've recovered bodies and probably living entities. In fact, I think I sent you something, and you sent me a copy back, Mike, of someone who claims to have been working with these bodies and organic material from these bodies.
Yeah, that was quite fascinating, and I think they talked about the aspect of the soul in that as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because actually years ago I started writing a fictional book about the ET agenda, possibility. I even called it agenda. but it may be that they've been dealing with us for a long, long time and have somehow worked or modified our DNA, or maybe trying to understand it. But one thing for sure that I'm convinced of is they are making hybrid beings, hybrids between us and them. And for what purpose, that's up to speculation, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But we can all talk about that. And they have some concepts of the soul as outlined in this document that are very interesting that I thought about too, and that is I think there's a cosmic so-called river of souls in the cosmos, and it is a place where souls are, let's say, combined, reoriented, and brought back into sentient beings. And we learn from our life experiences. We die and go back into this river of souls to, I guess, be assimilated with other with other experiences of living creatures or sentient beings. In fact, I was again, and stop me, please, if you want to interject or talk about something else. But I was looking at this discussion about Buddhism in the latest National Geographic here. I don't know if either of you read it, but it was fascinating to me because this is exactly what Buddha, who had been brought up in a military family, by the way, but he was tired of the what he called the endless suffering of his soul. Really, is many lives, and how to break that cycle. And that's how he came up with this concept of trying to reach nirvana or absolute enlightenment, and stop this suffering of this cycle I mentioned, that you have a life, you live it, you die, and your soul at some point returns into another life form, and you go through this cycle. But in living, you do a lot of suffering. Life is, as we know, a matter of some suffering, and but we learn things. We learn things from each of our lives, and then we come back again and repeat, recycle, etc. And Buddha wanted to stop this cycle, and he thought there was a way to do that, and that's how he came up with this eightfold path to final enlightenment.
I like Buddhism quite a lot. He's advising us to release attachments to this material world, and Jesus was largely telling us to do the same. Be in the world, but not of the world, which brings into question, whose world is this?
Right.
Is it a creation of our own being, or is it run by some other external entity?
Yeah, well, if you look at what that piece that I sent you, Mike, about the soul, the ETs don't consider individualism or individual souls. They don't place much value in individual souls. It's the concept of purifying this pool of souls, if you will, to the point where we've perfected this concept of full enlightenment. Apotheosis is what he calls it, I think.
Okay, I definitely want to read that article, Mike. If you wouldn't mind forwarding that on to me at some point, please.
Oh yeah, I'll send it to you as soon as we're finishing up
Fascinating.
here. It's pretty brief, but it's just like a boom, a quick punch of wow.
That's definitely my kind of topic right there.
Stuart, I kind of feel, I don't know, do you have anything else on that line? Because we're totally in your wheelhouse right now.
Yeah, well, there's a lot I could say, and it depends on how much our audience is, how far they've explored these type of topics. So there are Gnostic perspectives, which essentially say we're living in a world, a hologram, a matrix that we're trying to escape from. And that's largely along the path of what the Buddha was talking about. And Jesus, I could argue, was saying something similar. Jesus was laying down the model saying, release attachments to the world. He died and then came back, in another form that the apostles actually didn't recognize at first, and was saying, I'm going to the Father now. So it's a very interesting thing, like I like this whole concept of, are we living in a matrix? I like those type of questions. Are we living in a hologram? That's definitely, and I'm surprised by how many people are aware of these topics now and how much it's being discussed.
Yeah. I don't know, Stuart, have you ever heard of Susie Hansen? She's a New Zealander, a Kiwi, and she's written a book called The Dual Soul Connection. She's a long-time experiencer. In other words, she's been abducted many times, starting when she was about 10 or 11 years old. But at some point, the ETs showed her, I think when she was about 12, on board the craft. They brought her into a room, and there was this blue globe of light, or orb, blue orb of light, and they told her that this was the soul of her son that she would have at a later age, which she did have when she was in her 20s. But she also goes into the spirit beings, seeing them, the ETs as spirit beings, or and not solid, but some kind of angelic form. So you have to wonder how much spirituality is involved in what they're doing. And again, I think this is well worth a discussion or research about various experiences other people have had with these types of beings. Out-of-body experiences, for example.
Yeah, I've had some of those experiences. And since it's come up, I'll mention it briefly. So I found when I was in the astral realm that noises that occurred in this realm were significantly louder from the astral realm, which made me think an atomic bomb is a very loud occurrence and would be extremely loud in the astral realm. So I imagine these beings were coming partly for concern about their own environment of bombs being exploded.
I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, they were these sightings and observations on Earth of these beings and their objects kind of exploded with, no pun intended, with the advent of nuclear weapons.
Right.
And so they may have been brought here because they were literally hearing these explosions in other parts of the cosmos.
Right, because the Chinese, they light the firecrackers at New Year's Eve, and the other cultures strike drums to scare off spirits. And once I had some astral projections, I understood why, because noises in this realm are very loud in the astral realm. So it definitely would attract entities in that realm. Now, I haven't heard of that lady that you mentioned in New Zealand, but that's something I'm definitely interested in. But I did hear and read similar accounts from Dr. Carla Turner. Are you familiar with her?
I've heard the name. Dr. Turner, yes.
Yeah. Very, very interesting and similar type of information. I did learn a lot from that.
I would highly recommend you getting a hold of this book. It's called The Dual Soul Connection by Susie Hansen. It's Hansen. Very interesting.
Thank you. I will. I was going to say it's very interesting. Like all these topics bring into question: who are we? What are we really? Where are we? All these existential questions come up. And what I was getting at earlier, Robert, was you were asking existential questions about, I don't want to paraphrase, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you told me you were contemplating the intensity of atomic bombs. I mean, you were sitting in an environment where you might have been involved in launching those very missiles. So you must have been contemplating those existential questions quite a lot.
Well, it wasn't a matter of, how should I say it? I had no doubt, let's put it this way, I had no doubt that given the order, we would have launched those weapons.
Wow.
But we did, without, any level of misgiving or consciousness. It's a pretty brutal thing to say, but we would have launched into a war of annihilation, humanity and other living species on Earth. And it's a kind of it's a military mindset, of course. When you're in the military, of course, you're expected to kill for your country, take lives, maybe take many, many lives. Which is totally immoral, of course, but it's what you're expected to do, and that's what we were expected to do. That's what we would have done. But in the interim, as we were doing our jobs, of course, we would have these very brief, very short conversations about what it all meant. Why were we prepared to do this? And that's, again, when I get into this idea of nuclear deterrence. And another reason my story, for example, is not getting more play within the government is because they don't want an open discussion, they don't want a public discussion of the use and maintenance of nuclear forces. Because I think most rational people would come to the conclusion that we do need to work harder at abolishing all nuclear weapons everywhere on the planet. Otherwise, eventually, this so-called nuclear deterrence, or mutually assured destruction, as it's called, will happen. Somewhere, somehow, in the future, someone is going to get a hold of a nuclear weapon and launch it again against a group of people, and what will happen after that?
Bless you for saying that, sir. That's a very powerful statement coming from you, considering the role you've played.
Well, again, that's one of my commitments. I'm going to keep talking about this for that purpose.
Now, I found that very interesting. That's something I wanted to bring up. You found yourself in the role of teacher. When you were talking about your career path earlier, you talked about how you became a mathematics instructor. So you felt a call to a teaching role, which I find very fascinating. That's what you're doing now with us at this very moment.
I'm sorry, did you have a question, Stuart? I didn't. Oh,
Just an
just making
observation. Yeah,
observation.
yeah. I find it very interesting that you felt a call to a teaching role in life. So you were teaching mathematics, and at the moment you're teaching us in this very interview. I'm learning from what you're talking about, and our audience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Actually, I chose mathematics. Well, I've always liked math, but I chose it because learning or studying mathematics, even in rudimentary form, is important in your ability to develop the ability to reason, to be reasonable.
Yep.
To me, that's what mathematics is. The value of it for our young people, and so many young people don't realize that they're horrified when they have to do math homework because it's hard to understand sometimes. But the real value is it will help them in all forms of life, of their life experiences, by learning how to be rational and reasonable.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I was certainly horrified with my math homework, that's for sure. But Robert, I want to ask you something else too, because in our last episode we spoke with a retired Navy person, Mr. Kevin Day, actually, and he was postulating that whatever these are, they might allow us to have some minor tactical nuclear explosions here and there, but he was of the mind that they would not allow for us to completely destroy this planet, because it's such a precious place with all of its life. And with what you experienced during the Cold War, with the tens of thousands of nuclear missiles, and then they start showing up and turning off the nuclear missiles. That sort of lends to his postulation. Can you comment about that?
I don't know that we can make that jump just because they turned off a few of our missiles, that they would keep us from having a nuclear war. I'm still I don't have any definite thought about what they would do if we came to the brink, and of course we did come to the brink during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And by the way, there were UFOs sighted at least one of the bases that was on ready status to launch bombers, nuclear bombers. However, I think what they did was simply a message of caution and concern that we were reaching that point where we could have a nuclear war, and we need to think seriously about abolishing nuclear weapons. So I think that was the message that was given to us by these incidents. There's a book that I reference in one of my books, and it's called The World Set Free. And it was written by, who was that guy? A very, very famous author. He wrote The Time Machine.
That's H.G. Wells.
H.G. Oh, wait a minute. Was that? No, I'm not thinking of. Oh, no, I'm not thinking of H.G. Wells. Anyway, or maybe I am. I'm having a little problem now remembering who wrote this book. But in this book, which was written in 1914, he talks about the development of nuclear weapons in 1914.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. It might have been H.G. Wells. Yeah. But anyway, you can look this up. And he states that in somewhere in this story where he talks about humans actually engaging in nuclear war, he states that it may have been that this was the only way we could have seen the folly of this weapon by actually engaging and seeing the total destruction. But we've experienced the bomb. Of course, we dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. We've seen that how many people you can destroy in one blow. 100,000 died, at least 100,000 died at Hiroshima with the initial bomb blast, and then another 100,000 died later on from their wounds or from radiation sickness, etc. So that one small bomb, relatively small, it was only 20 kilotons equivalent TNT. And the bombs that I had strapped to my missiles were about 800 kilotons. I'm not telling you anything classified. This is public information.
Wow.
So from 20 to 800 kilotons.
Whoa.
Think of the destruction or the number of lives that can be taken from that bomb. And of course, we're in the megaton range also now. We've got bombs in millions of kilotons of destructive power. So we don't need to have nuclear war to see how much damage could be caused by that. And a nuclear winter that would follow, meaning radioactive fallout from those explosions. Absolutely devastating to every living thing on the planet.
It's really just mind-boggling to think about that we would even the fact that we have it. I mean, obviously we do, right? But to then continue to make it bigger and bigger and more powerful and more destructive, like, was the first one not destructive enough, right?
Certainly not.
It's like
But
hyperbole.
this is the kind of hell that we made for ourselves when we started this idea of nuclear deterrence. And that concept means always have a bigger weapon or more weapons than your opponent, right? Your enemy. And so that's why we had this increase in power of these weapons over the years. And now we're going in the opposite direction also. We're developing these tactical nuclear weapons, and that's what's been a bone of contention in the war in Ukraine, that Russia wants to deploy these smaller tactical nuclear weapons to use, and maybe that won't cause us to escalate to the higher ones, but nobody can guarantee that. Once we start using any type of nuclear device, who's to say some country won't decide to escalate the size of the bomb they'll use?
Wow, that's a serious problem.
Right.
Scary to think about. So, Robert, I wanted to ask you as well, what advice would you have for any current active military, law enforcement, first responders, if they encounter a UAP or even a non-human entity? Like, what should they do?
That's an interesting question because I've spoken to other individuals, of course, many individuals in the military that have had these experiences or encounters. Um, and it's not a question of preparing for that, really. It just happens. It can be frightening. It can be, they could have other feelings towards what's going on. But what I would recommend to anybody who had these experiences, either a sighting or something, a more personal experience, excuse me, is to immediately write down what they saw or what they experienced in as much detail as they can remember. And then after that, if they have anything else happen, to write that down and keep a journal. Actually, I've got my a journal here, which I've kept for many years of things that have occurred that you might call paranormal or strange, and I've written those down, and even dreams that I've remembered in some details, so that at some future time you might be able to share those with other individuals who've also had experiences. So, and the idea, of course, is to come to some resolution or conclusion about various aspects of this phenomena. So that would be my recommendation. Write it down and keep writing if you have other things come to mind.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, thank you for that response. It's very interesting. And I imagine, I was thinking while you were saying that there are probably quite a few people who have confided in you who have not come forward publicly. Would there be, and I'm not asking you for specifics, but have you found that there have been a number of people who have come to you and quietly said, I've had experiences, but I don't want to talk about them publicly?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, I've been around this stuff for over 30 years, and I've met a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, and they have confided in me. And there's some people I'm hopeful that someday that they will come forward, but haven't done so, and I'm going to keep that confidentiality, of course.
Well, I want to honor and respect the role of the supporting role you're playing for those people. Very beautiful. I'm glad they feel comfortable to share that with you and you're able to support them in that way.
You bet. Thank you. However, having said that, I think people who have had significant experiences, we'll call them whistleblowers, even though they may be required not to speak about them, or for their own reasons, they want to protect their lives, their futures, their jobs, do not want to discuss these things. Think about actually coming to the conclusion that it would be helpful for society as a whole to learn what they know, and at some point work towards getting to the point where they can come forward and talk about it. Because there's, again, as a society as a whole, we want to learn as much as we can and know as much as we can about these phenomena.
I find that very interesting. And I would say that the Pentagon has played a role in opening the door to that discussion for people.
They have. Like I said before, there's still a lot in the Congress and the Senate that want to see more disclosed by the various government offices and the public. And I don't think that's going to go away. So I'm hopeful that more of that will happen. There'll be more hearings. There'll be more pressure put on agencies to disclose. Internally, there will be a building of pressure. So I'm hopeful that more will come out in the future for sure.
I find it interesting that the military is leading the way in this way, and less so the religious or spiritual community.
Well, yes, the military-industrial, the military-industrial complex, the intelligence agencies are the ones that have been dealing with this in a very pragmatic way. However, the public needs to realize that they are taking actions, making decisions regarding these objects and these beings without our knowledge and without our consent. So this is not what's supposed to happen in the democratic countries. They're supposed to inform the public enough so that we can make informed decisions about what actions, if any, to take. Or more specifically, I don't know, but I fear that our military forces have been given the orders to take these objects down, shoot them out of the sky if they can, or somehow disable them. And is that what we want? Is that what the public wants? Do we want to consider these beings an enemy or a potential enemy or a potential friend or foe?
I find it interesting the role that science fiction has played in helping us explore these ideas. The movies that people like, or who have made those movies? Star Wars, Close Encounters.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas.
Yeah, they've been helping us as a society and a community ponder these issues, and I think they've played a certain role too. These artistic people have had these visions.
Yes, absolutely. And so we are fighting not only our governments, but our perceptions and our ideas, our thoughts about what we're dealing with. And of course, these perceptions may be entirely wrong and may be entirely right. Who knows? But the more we know as a whole, the more the public knows, the better off we'll be, like I say, in making informed decisions.
So, Robert, thank you so much again for taking your time to chat with us today. And if you could remind us again, what's the website where people can go and find more information about you with the files and the recordings and the books and such?
Actually, they can go to spiralgalaxy.org. That's spiralgalaxy, all one word, .org. And then you'll see a list of a menu there. And I think if they go to the Malmstrom incidents, you'll see another page called My Evidence. And they can actually hear the audio tape I made of my commander and the commander of Echo Flight. I've got some letters there. I've got some information that I received from the Air Force under the Freedom of Information Act, some documents. So some of my evidence is there. They can also go to, I have a YouTube channel. So Bob Salas is my YouTube channel. And they can listen to a presentation of other incidents that we made in, when was that, 2019, I think it was. A group of us went to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and gave a long presentation starting with the 1945 incidents over Hanford nuclear site in Washington. Navy pilots intercepted UFOs over those sites in early 1945 a couple of times, and then it goes on from there to discuss just about all those 13 incidents I mentioned. We present that. We present quite a bit of information there also. And I've produced small, short video clips of my own incident, more details, more witness testimony on video. So it's out there. And those are 3 books. You can order them on Amazon, or you can go to my website and order them through my website.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Stuart. I enjoyed talking to both you and Mike at length about a lot of interesting things. And we just scratched the surface, of course.
Indeed. Well, thank you again, and we definitely appreciate your time.
My pleasure. My complete pleasure. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right.
Well, Stuart, what do you think about all that?
Wow, I'm absolutely delighted, and I'm amazed at where that conversation went to, like astral projection, alien hybridization, just so many incredible topics that I was not expecting, but I'm very grateful that he covered.
Yeah, I think and Robert even said it himself, we're just scratching the surface. And I know that there might be some more to say about that maybe in the future. But for now, it was, the fact that ET, on a regular basis, likes to take control of our nukes is, I think, very significant. It's something that, on one hand, it might be like, how do you not know this? But I think that there's a lot of people out there who actually don't maybe know this, even though Robert's been speaking about it for, decades, really.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important what we're doing here. And I was also shocked by how many occurrences there are of this type of incident happening, really blowing my mind.
Yeah, and I was blown away by the statistics. 50 to 60,000 nuclear warheads at that time. Like, good Lord, it only takes like 1 or 2 to completely annihilate the Earth, right? I mean, it's just wild stuff.
Now, if that was the peak time of the most nukes, and it's receded somewhat, then I would say it's had an impact of us reducing our number of nukes. But I'd need to check on the numbers of that.
That is a good point. I actually have some numbers, but they're not how many we have. They're how many we've disposed of over the years.
Wow.
But on one hand, it's nice to see we've disposed of a lot. But on the other hand, it doesn't show how many we actually have.
Wow. Well, it must have been a shock to see that they can be disarmed so easily. So whoever's having the nukes in their arsenal, whatever country or whatever company was making them, military industrial complex company must have realized, okay, so how can we really sell these now if they're prone to these UFOs coming and switching them off?
Well, with that, I don't necessarily think it's that easy to do, because they penetrated through a lot of metal and concrete under the earth, and they were able to mess around with a very specific instrument within the missile itself. So I definitely don't think it's easy to do, at least for man, but obviously for ET, it's a cinch, right?
Wow, fascinating.
Join us next time as we start to take this conversation literally all around the world. We are teleporting to the UK, folks. We're going to be speaking with Reverend David William Perry. He brings a whole lot of energy and a little bit of levity to this heavier topic. You're absolutely going to want to see this. It's utterly amazing. Thank you all so much for your comments, your likes, subscribes, and shares thus far. We really, truly appreciate it, and that's why we do this, to bring these interviews free to the world everywhere. If you want to see more of this, all you got to do is smash those buttons. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.